He hired a prostitute, but in all of this, in this kind of romantic excitement, he forgot about it. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol Gala Street in Krakow. A well-known street has, among other things, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Administration Hospital, and right on this street, which is also not far from the Krakow Market Square, Daria was last seen getting into a car, supposedly, and that was her last trace, the last time she was seen alive. September 27, it's 2014 already. The small town of Bednarka, that's about 140 kilometers from here. A young guy is going mushroom picking. This is the time when there are a lot of mushrooms. He gets closer. There's also a forester's lodge near Bednarka, an old lodge known to the locals. They know that there are a lot of mushrooms nearby. The young guy is walking and sees that something is lying there, something big. At first he thought it was some kind of mannequin or a big doll, and then not at all. The code name for this case was Doll. These code names, of course, are different, made up by the police officers. Some better, some worse, some funny. It varies, and that's how it was in this case. It was immediately clear that the code name would be Doll because that was the first association of that young mushroom picker. He comes closer, thinking it's a mannequin doll. It turned out to be the body of a young woman, completely naked. Well, of course. Frightened, he ran to notify the police and an investigation began. This place, it's quite a busy spot, I would say, because it's right next to the Barwinek-Dukla-Gorlic route. A lot of cars drive there, and many drivers simply stop there as well. Some stop to eat a sandwich or have a drink, others for what you might call a bathroom break. So when the police arrived at the scene, they immediately realized that the body of this young woman had been dumped there, that someone simply brought her there and left her in that condition. Well, the search began, checking all kinds of information, telegrams, information about weather anywhere in Gorlice or in the neighboring counties. Well, such a woman. The girl disappeared. Her body was brought here to Krakow for an autopsy. The doctor performing the autopsy determined that the woman was about 25, 27 years old, but he couldn't determine why she had died. He didn't find any obvious signs of murder, any evidence that would clearly indicate she had been killed. Therefore, the doctor performing the autopsy ordered histopathological tests, which also include tests for various types of diseases. But these tests sometimes take many weeks, so the investigators had no choice but to wait for the autopsy results. But you have to agree, it's an extremely mysterious case. The body of a young girl, a woman who was undressed. Well, it clearly indicated that some kind of crime had taken place, but what kind exactly? That was the question for the investigators, and they also had to find the answer. There was also something distinctive on the body, a tattoo. The woman had 3, as described in the examination report, 3 pale pink roses tattooed on her. Of course, nowadays there are, I would say, countless tattoos. They're all different, and some are just made up. Back then, in those years, if someone had a tattoo, it usually had some kind of symbolism. It was immediately obvious. 3 roses probably have some kind of erotic symbolism, especially when combined with other elements like dots or different dates. It was a kind of symbolism that was personal to that person, something they had experienced, maybe a memory of lost love or a turbulent love or some turning point in that person's life. Without a doubt, it was related to the erotic sphere. Because of that, the police officers, colleagues from the criminal department, also showed this tattoo to the so-called morals department, meaning the female police officers. Most often because they are the ones who deal with, among other things, prostitution. So they concluded that without a doubt, we need to look among prostitutes, that it could simply be one of the prostitutes. But a prostitute who, well, nobody knows where she came from, if she was even a prostitute at all, because that was just an assumption, so they started looking first near Gorlice, and such information also appeared in Slovakia, in Novi Sonj, and in Tarnov. But again, nothing, and there was no other way. That tattoo just had to be shown in the media, in newspapers. Of course, this kind of information spreads like wildfire because a lot of people are simply interested. It's a mysterious, intriguing case. And then came information suggesting that it could actually be a prostitute from Krakow, and even a specific name and surname were mentioned. It was Daria Full, though of course the second part Full wasn't her real surname. It came down to the fact that, as a prostitute, she simply engaged in various risky behaviors, I would say, involving sadomasochism, humiliation, beating, choking, and all those different elements that some clients simply prefer. It was known that was the scenario. The version that seemed most likely at the time was that Daria was simply killed by her last client. But why did he take her out of Krakow, since that's where he arranged to meet her? Why did he drive her 140 kilometers away near Gorlice? That was still a mystery in the investigation, but it was already clear that it needed to be addressed. We need to look among people who prefer this kind of sex, people who probably come from Krakow or the surrounding area, and look for people with these kinds of preferences. There was already something, because it was known who the murdered woman was, whether she was murdered. Of course, this was just an assumption, because there were still no final results from the autopsy, which was also a mystery, but it was already known where to look. And of course, it was also logical that the killer was from somewhere around Gorlice, maybe from beyond the southern border, maybe even from Slovakia. Well, it seemed unlikely that he killed Daria here or that he transported her body in a car at all. 140 kilometers, considering that he could be stopped along the way, even during a routine police check, which makes it even more risky. However, all of this happened there, somewhere in Gorlice, and that's where we need to look for the place where Daria was last seen. Again, the police officers, my colleagues, went back to those various suspects who appeared in the case files, and investigations had been conducted against them. People with certain tendencies listed in police records were all checked again, once more, those who were in those records. From the area around Gorlice, from the area around Novi Sonj, Tarnov, they also asked their colleagues in Slovakia for help. Well, at some point it seemed like there were some concrete leads, but when they checked the alibi, it turned out that this person had nothing to do with Daria's death. Therefore, at the same time, because all of this was happening in parallel, they started to wonder if this man, the last client as he was called, might actually be from outside Krakow. That it was someone who simply ordered a prostitute and came, and he could have really come from far away. That was just an assumption, but how to find out or how to reach this man since he could have been from different towns all over Poland. Therefore, the police officers concluded it might be possible to do it by placing an ad in the newspaper. Here they took into account that Daria had, I would say, a certain type of appearance. Some would say she was a bit plump, and she also had certain preferences that she offered. There aren't many clients like that, so the police simply placed such an ad and waited, hoping that maybe someone would respond to it. Two pieces of information came together. First, the police from the criminal department managed to reach the escort agency, the place where Daria Full was employed. And here they started talking to her colleagues, who said that it was indeed the beginning of the weekend. They remembered that someone came for Daria, that it was a slim man around his 50s, but nothing else was known except that he was using a prepaid mobile phone. Besides the fact that he was about that age, Daria probably got into the car on Gala Street. That's where we started this episode, and that was all. But almost at the same time, a second piece of information appeared. This is somewhat a response to that police announcement in the newspaper. There, the police officers saw that a certain man named Sławomir was active, and Sławomir comes from Opole. Quietly, they started checking the logins from his phone. They started checking the logins from his tablet. And it turned out that it was a bullseye, because during that time, during that weekend, which is when Daria died, his laptop was logging in from Krakow. That's Sławomir. A man in his 50s from Opole was arrested. The conversation at the police station, and he says that it was true that he ordered a prostitute for the weekend, that he has certain preferences, that he even paid for everything. It was confirmed in advance. However, he put her in the car, but then he started looking at her. He came to the conclusion that he wouldn't use her services after all, because, well, Daria is too plump, and he said he prefers very slim women, so they parted ways. He said he dropped her off at the station or near a gas station in Wieliczka, and then he just drove away. And he doesn't know what happened to Daria, he has no idea, and the fact that she's dead is also a surprise to him. Well, of course, his explanation seemed, to put it mildly, far-fetched. The police didn't believe it, but they still had to prove it to him. There was also information from the Department of Forensic Medicine about the results of the autopsy. I would say there was a problem again, because it turned out that Daria died as a result of suffocation. But it was suffocation in a way, with some kind of cord or something like that, in such a way that it wasn't clear whether she suffocated herself. As you remember, she also preferred a certain kind of sex, or if she was strangled with that cord. Well, no one was able to figure that out. The doctor says, well, I don't know, I can't assess it, I can't say for sure whether it was an accident and she suffocated herself, or if someone deliberately strangled her. The police also started looking for the place where they already had a location for Sławomir's laptop. They began searching and also reached the rented apartment in Krakow. Here nearby in this apartment, both of them had just met. They searched the apartment and again found a lot of evidence indicating that Daria had been in this apartment, in this room. They found her blood, they found her hair, and they also found it by the bed. An earring. Well, they showed this earring to her friends, and they said yes, that it definitely belonged to Daria. So, because of that, well, it seemed that the case was obvious. Sławomir himself kept denying everything. He claimed that, as I told you before, He dropped her off in Jelichka and then drove away. So because of that, the police kept searching. Here, the prosecutor came to the conclusion that they needed to appoint an information technology expert who would determine whether there was any evidence indicating that Sławomir's laptop had logged in near the place where Daria's body was found. And indeed, such an information technology specialist was hired, a good one, I would say, and he very precisely determined that Sławomir's laptop was logged in exactly 56 meters from the place where her body was found at that time. Well, because of that, the police officers were already convinced that this time he would crack. And after all, he was at that place at that time, 56 meters from where the body was dumped, so he simply had to be there. To which Sławomir says yes, that he was there. More or less, because after he left Daria in Jelichka, he got in the car, wanted to relax a bit, and drove towards the Bieszczady area. That's why his phone was logged in that area, but then there was some kind of weather breakdown, and such a weather breakdown really did happen. He lost his sense of direction, turned back, and stubbornly returned to his place, to Opol. He kept insisting that he simply had no contact with Daria. But of course the trial still took place. No one believed Sławomir's explanation that he left Daria in Jelichka. No one simply believed it. Including the prosecutor, including the court, because the case went to trial. And it turned out that the court of first instance had quite a dilemma, because they simply didn't know what to do with all of this. It was true that Sławomir had some contact with Daria. He did, but whether she actually died in his presence, that was not the case. The Walk's autopsy results showed it was unclear if she suffocated or was suffocated. Therefore, it's hard to blame him for that as well. And the court of first instance found that Sławomir was simply innocent. The prosecutor's office filed an appeal. The court of second instance has already looked into this case. It's from a completely different point of view, and I would say, in the light of Polish criminology, in the light of various similar proceedings, it was a breakthrough. This is probably the first case of its kind, the first ruling of this type, where the court stated that it doesn't matter how Daria died. What matters is that if two people decide to have this kind of sex, the other person is responsible for the one who has sex with them. So I would say a kind of dependency, a kind of control, supervision, and care from the partner. I would say it's a debatable matter, but in light of all this, the court decided that since Daria suffocated, because that's what they had to assume, Sławomir is responsible for not reacting in time and for not saving her life. And that's how Sławomir got 3 years, which his defense appealed again, claiming that there was no evidence that Sławomir was actually there. He transported the body from Krakow, where the death likely occurred. He drove it there to Gorlice, that the laptop login was accidental, no one confirmed it, therefore. So this is another chapter of this case, a small, minor case, I would say, in terms of how much it's been heard about. Important, of course, because of the death of this woman, but also groundbreaking because of these various legal complexities. Here, the prosecutor's office, the court decides, or rather, the court decides that there will be a crime scene reenactment, which means the judge will get into the car and simulate bringing the body, because that's what it has to be called. The role of the police was to prepare a special mannequin. The people who were there, who went there, said it was a doll to... The second version, kind of like the same movie, except it's all part of this investigative experiment. Could Sławomir have been there at the time since he logged in those 56 meters, or will it be based on the truth? It happened just 5 years later, after the death. Of course, then, It was a big event. At that time, around that hunting lodge, of course, people found out about it, and journalists came in large numbers to the place and waited for Sławomir's arrival. As I said, 5 years had passed, he had changed a lot, gained weight, grew a mustache, and looked older. Probably those 5 years of trials were also the reason why he looked older and changed. But in the meantime, it turned out that he had a case involving counterfeit banknotes. Among other things, 48 fake 100 zloty bills were found on him. And he had another case because he posted pornographic photos of his first partner somewhere. So he was active all the time, he came in his own car, and journalists started looking into him, and it turned out he came with his partner. As you remember, he dumped Daria because she had such curvy shapes. It turned out that his taste changed too, because this partner, his next one, also had rather Rubenesque shapes. The journalists brought it up a bit, of course with a wink, and then the experiment itself began. The judge took part in it. He was sitting in the back seat. The police officers prepared that mannequin, that doll. The problem was to balance the mannequin properly, because it had to weigh as much as Daria did, so the mannequin was weighed several times. Everything matches the stand-in with the mannequin. He ran several times from the car, different versions where that car could have stopped 5 years earlier. Different versions. It all lasted a few hours until finally the judge decided that yes, Sławomir could have been at that place at that time and could have dumped Daria's body, because his laptop, or actually any laptop, logs in at exactly that distance, which is 56 meters. After this experiment, the Court of Appeal had no more doubts and decided that it was indeed Sławomir who dumped Daria's body there. It upheld the entire sentence, those 3 years of imprisonment, and thus the verdict became final. Well, everything that happened points to one thing, that Sławomir simply wanted to spend a blissful weekend in Kraków. He practically planned everything. He rented an apartment. He hired a prostitute, but in all of this, in this kind of romantic excitement, he forgot about basic safety precautions. And as a result, Daria suffocated. Well, he panicked, didn't know what to do, and put her body in the trunk of the car. Then he drove 140 kilometers towards Gorlice and left Daria near that hunting lodge. He returned to Opole, which he calculated was 340 kilometers from Kraków, including an extra 140 kilometers. No one would connect him with all of this, and he would remain unknown. Well, it turned out differently. I said the verdict was somehow groundbreaking, because before, if such situations happened, it would just end with no one being held responsible. This time, Sławomir was the one found guilty. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and of course, take care.